Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. You've got to be a little older to remember this movie. Do you remember the movie The Mouse That Roared? I believe the movie was probably made back in the 60s. I know it starred Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers played the Prime Minister of the Duchy of Fenwick. Peter Sellers played the general on the ship that was owned by the Duchy of Fenwick. And Peter Sellers also played the Queen of the Duchy of Fenwick. Peter Sellers dominated that film. The movie was about this little place, believe it or not, called the Duchy of Fenwick, that decided they needed money. And they decided maybe the best way to get money was to declare war on the United States and then lose and have the U.S. pay them reparations from the war. So they declared war on the United States, and you'll have to watch the movie, but it's hilarious. And the outcome is that the U.S. is afraid to fight them, surrenders, and the Duchy of Fenwick does not get their reparations money after the war. The Mouse That Roared. What an apt title. Could have been the title for the nation of Israel at the end of the history of the northern tribes. The last four kings of Israel were vassals to the Assyrian Empire. But vassals meant it was basically an international protection racket. The money would be paid from the Israelite kings to Assyria, and in turn, Assyria wouldn't attack them and wipe them out. Until one day, under King Hoshea, who doesn't seem to have too many brains, the nation decided to become the mouse that roared. And this tiny nation that's a vassal to Assyria said, no, we're not paying you any more money. It was predictable. What God had predicted through Amos and through Hosea was now about to come to pass. The Assyrian army was enmassed against the nation of Israel, surrounded the city of Samaria, and starved the people out. Being a city under siege by a foreign army was not a pretty thing. You really didn't have to fire an arrow or light anything on fire. You just had to sit outside until all the people starved to death. There are descriptions in the Bible of what a city under siege would be like, and it talks about cannibalism, it talks about eating dove's dung, it talks about all of the things that are a disgusting part of a city under siege. And that's what happened in Samaria. 721, the nation of Israel is no more. Amos said the people would be hauled off with fish hooks, and they were. The Assyrians put hooks through the nose of the captives, tied cords together to one long rope, and tied that rope to a saddle horn, and took the captives away that way. Assyria brought other captives in, other people from other nations, to intermingle and intermarry with the few Israelites that were still left behind. And the Bible tells us that that really is the foundation of the Samaritans of the New Testament. The Jews of the New Testament would consider those Samaritans mongrels because they were intermarried with all of the other captives that the nation of Assyria had brought in to intermarry with the remaining Israelites. In some ways, some of them still worshiped Yahweh, but they added the worship of other gods to the worship of Yahweh. 2 Kings chapter 17 gives you the reasons for the fall of the northern tribes. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 7 says, "And this was so because the people of Israel had sinned against Yahweh their God, who'd brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations whom Yahweh drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs which the kings of Israel had introduced." The prophets would identify many problems that the people had, many sins that the people were involved in, but the root cause of the fall of the northern tribes was idolatry. If you don't recognize your God, then you're also not going to recognize the laws that your God has established. And while Amos attacked the symptoms of a nation that didn't recognize its God, Hosea had pointed out that the root cause was that they didn't recognize their God. And 2 Kings now says, because they did not have that relationship with Yahweh, Yahweh allowed them to go into captivity. The sad note at the end of this is that those people never came back. There never is a nation of Israel in terms of the northern tribes anymore, just those Samaritans. The hope is now in the south, in Judah, where a king in David's line still sits on the throne. That's where we'll continue the story the next time.